And we are set. Hello and welcome to the Time Lord podcast. This is Voss, and we have quite a bit to cover today, actually. Quite a lot of news and events happening in the footballing world. And just as we enter the latter stages of the Champions League, starting with the second legs of the round of 16s. So for right now, let's begin by covering a topic I'm all sure we're really excited to hear about, and that's Liverpool. Liverpool are having kind of their craziest, season in a long time. I know for Liverpool fans it's really unfortunate. But there's quite a few reasons as to why they're struggling so bad. And, you might point to the injuries. You might point to Van Dijk being absent. You might point to, Jota, who was really in form, being injured and missing much of the season. And now he's only just coming back, and who knows what's going to happen with him. But for me, really, especially with respect to, the game on Thursday, and seeing some of the tactical issues that Tuchel exposed against Klopp, I think we should take a trip down memory lane for a second. If you look at Liverpool, right, a couple years ago, they were playing a completely different style of football to what we saw in the 97-point season, and then subsequently the 99-point season in 1920. It was a 4-2-3-1 ultra-attacking, gegen-pressing style that was much more reminiscent of the Dortmund team under Klopp. Of course, the crux of that 4-2-3-1 was the cam, who at the time was Coutinho. Really, really important player, and much of the creativity, that Liverpool would get after turnovers in transitions, would come off of him. Providing for the likes of Mane and Salah, who at that time was, only just getting into the team, and you could see even back then this guy was a really good goal scorer. The likes of the Trents and the Robertsons, they didn't really have that much pressure to create. Now, ever since Coutinho left, right, and then of course there was the falling out between Klopp and his longtime assistant coach Željko Buvac. And then, of course, Liverpool, lost the Champions League to Real Madrid. And the season after that, the focus, I think, of course, they went for the Champions League too. They won the Champions League. But really, the focus for the past two seasons for Liverpool, not counting this season, but strictly 18-19 and 19-20, was really the league. Because it's been ages since they had won it, previously. And Klopp really needed a system, that would allow this Liverpool team, who never really had that much squad depth, to compete with an absolute juggernaut like Man City, who were ripping teams apart, week in, week out. Of course, they got the 100 points in 17-18, playing really, really good football, scoring lots of goals. And Klopp and Liverpool at that time, they were really, really good in certain big games, for example, against City themselves, but it's these week in, week out games against smaller opposition, compact opposition that sits back, and won't give Liverpool space, oftentimes would counterattack them and get, goals here and there, take points off Liverpool. Those were the kinds of games that, really took off many, many points off of Liverpool in 17-18, which is why I think they only finished maybe fourth that season. So something clearly had to change. So, he basically took a key part of Zidane's, Madrid template in his use of the fullbacks, right? Klopp had two very good fullbacks, in Robertson and Trent, who were really, really good crossers of the ball. So the entire structure of Liverpool changed. They played kind of, it went from being a wide 4-3-3 at the tail end of the 17-18 season to becoming much more of a narrower 4-3-3, almost a diamond sort of thing, kind of like what you saw with Madrid, with Firmino dropping back into the 10, and Mane and Salah coming way inside. And this, really helped their goal scoring. And then, of course, pretty much all the creative burden would fall to Trent and Robertson, and on the surface, there was not much creativity, but the really key thing for them at the time was that their defense really shone. the likes of Van Dijk, Matip then coming back from injury in 2019 and having a really good latter stages of the season, Fabinho coming into the team, Henderson having a good season. So with that strong defensive apparatus, stopping the opposition from scoring, and then of course, Trent and Robertson could cross balls, into the box all day for Mane and Salah until, they got the goal. So basically, and the league results showed it. At that time, Liverpool weren't really blowing teams out. Man City usually always had a higher goal scored and goal difference compared to Liverpool in the 18-19 season, especially when they finished above Liverpool by a point. Liverpool in 18-19 and 19-20 never really occasionally they would with a more aggressive style, but most of the time in these week in week out league games, they were really grinding out teams, using their defense to stop them from scoring, and pretty much just spamming cross after cross into the box and nicking a goal. They would usually win 1-0, 2-0, 2-1, and that keep accumulating points, and you have to credit their consistency for it, right? But here's the problem with that. When you're, and actually the foundations of this, were actually started in the 18-19 Champions League campaign. I know, of course, Liverpool won that, but their path to victory wasn't always straightforward. They lost pretty much every away game in the group stages, I believe. Then they lost, their away record was just not that good. They lost away to Barcelona. And of course, they had the famous comeback and they won. But if you look tactically, there were reasons as to why. Usually when Klopp went with that more conservative approach in those away games, the opposition would often find ways to isolate, Mane, Salah, and Firmino from the fullbacks and prevent Liverpool from doing damage, and then score goals on the other end. In the case of, for example, PSG away, Tuchel at that time, and there were some aspects of that template which he used again, with Chelsea against Liverpool on Thursday, where he was able to pin, in that instance, Trent and Robertson back and isolate the front three that way. With Napoli in the group stages that season and the season after, same thing. Ancelotti used sort of a 4-4-2 structure to keep the fullbacks from getting involved in the attack and providing service from, for the likes of Mane and Salah. You then saw it with Atletico Madrid as well in the round of 16 in 2020. The main thing here is this. Whenever the front three were isolated and whenever the fullbacks couldn't provide the creativity, there's no real creativity, for Liverpool coming through the middle. They no longer have that cam, that attacking midfielder, that line breaker. In somebody similar to Coutinho who can then add that extra bit of dynamism in the attack, perhaps score goals or give some kind of through ball, for Mane and Salah to feed off of. It's, and you saw teams really starting to figure out how to stop Liverpool from scoring. But the thing is, because their defense was so good, it wasn't really easy, for you to score goals on them as well. However, the thing is, with this season, once some of those defenders got hit with injuries, Matip, being out for the rest of the season, Van Dijk being out for most of the season, and some defensive issues, for example, against Aston Villa in the early half of the season, started being shown, even in their presence. Liverpool, the lack of creativity is becoming an even bigger issue now. It's becoming an even bigger issue now because it's not like the old days where they can just outscore opponents if the defense is having a bad day. Because of the lack of creativity, there's not really much going on for Liverpool on both ends of the pitch. They're conceding, because of the defensive injuries. But I believe that their problems up top, you can point to the poor form of the likes of Amane and Firmino, but I believe it's also kind of down to Klopp's coaching. I do believe, to an extent, it's down to the likes of Klopp's coaching. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Shout out to Sean, because, I was having kind of a debate with him the other day. He said, if Pep was coaching, Liverpool right now, they would finish second. And while I still don't agree with that in particular, I think with Pep, Liverpool's given, their injury fortune and everything, and with regards to their defense, if they were coached by Pep right now, their defense would probably be as bad, if not maybe slightly worse than it is. But the thing is, I feel ultimately their attack would be more efficient with Pep, and here's why. And I think he explained it really well, but the thing is, Pep would get the best out of the likes of Thiago and Keita. I know Keita's had his injury issues, which is why he's probably, not gotten into the team, as much as, many would have hoped. But the thing is, I feel even in games where he is fit, Klopp really isn't getting the best out of him because of this, system that's far too reliant on the fullback spamming crosses. You're not really, playing to Keita's strengths. He showed, for example, in that first leg against Bayern in 2019, he showed kind of his ability to break the lines and created a couple of chances here and there, but Klopp took him off, in the 70-something minute. He's not really using his playmaking and line-breaking abilities to the best level. He has a very good penetrative number 8 here. In injuries aside, even when he's fit, Klopp just doesn't seem to be getting the best out of him. And let's talk about Thiago for a second. And what I'm about to say, might shock some listeners. But here's the thing about him. Thiago's performances are actually kind of at a similar level to, what they were at Bayern. As in, he's still playing at a world-class level. Shocking, right? The thing is, Thiago's doing a lot of the things he did at his former club. And the problem with him is, I think the fans, just the fact that he's known as this, player who's really, really good on the ball, really press resistant, great dribbler. The fans really thought they were getting, maybe a very good playmaking midfielder, an extremely creative midfielder who could provide some kind of, X factor or creative dynamism, from within Liverpool's midfield that was lacking, the past year or so. But that's actually not, the kind of player that Thiago is, which is, at the heart of this, issue. The last time at Bayern where Thiago was used as a cam, as, a creative, advanced midfielder, was under Carlo Ancelotti, because of course Ancelotti didn't really know how to use Muller. He used Thiago in a much more attacking and creative role, so he could link up with Lewandowski and provide, from the midfield. But since then, of course after Carlo got sacked and Heinkes came in, and then Kovac and then Flick, Thiago's really changed and become, more of a number 6 in a double pivot system. And of course he reached his peak, I think, last season under Flick. He's very press resistant, which helps in building from the back when you're trying to do that. He's very good on the ball. It's extremely difficult to get the ball off of him. He's mobile. He's very good at counter pressing. I think his counter pressing was, this past year was at the best level it's ever been. He can set the tempo of the game because of how good he is on the ball. He can slow the game down and speed the game up, which is something I think he actually does better than Kimmich. But the thing about him is, sometimes he can give you a really good ball from deep, and things like that, but he's not really a guy who can give you a lot of penetration when it comes to attacking. When you look at Bayern, right? You look at Bayern, like the most number of assists in the team last season. It came from Muller. Not Thiago. The main guy who was the creative influence in the attack. Ultimately was Muller. Thiago had like a much sort of different role. He wasn't giving the attacking impetus in the team. He was sort of setting the tempo, like I said, and helping to control the game with Goretzka, like in that double pivot system. And I think most importantly, counter pressing and building from the back. He's essentially like a very good postmodern number 6. So when you look at Liverpool's midfield, like you could either go with, like, for example, a Fabinho Thiago double pivot, or maybe something like a Henderson Thiago double pivot. So the question now is, who's going to provide the creativity in the attack? Who's going to become like the more offensive number 8 or number 10 in the team? And that's, I think, like, the big reason why their attack is so poor, because that's like a question that like Klopp hasn't really answered yet. And I just feel like if this was Pep, and I believe Keita was on the bench like on Thursday as well, dude. If this was Pep, I feel like he would give Liverpool a bit more penetration from the middle. Keita, Thiago, these are like kind of Pep type midfielders, you have to admit. And when I saw that game against Chelsea, right, there was a world, like, initially, like, the way that game panned out, both teams, like, tried to go down the flanks, but eventually, when Chelsea settled into their rhythm, there was much, much more, like, coming through the middle for them. The way they were breaking the lines, the way they were, like, moving the ball through the midfield, Conte giving long balls, Conte had a very, very good game, and his distribution was on point. Some of those long balls, like, out into the likes of, Mount, who eventually scored. Jorginho had a very good game. So Tuchel, he's using a much better attacking methodology compared to the Klopp. With Liverpool, it's like, the ball would immediately just go out wide to likes of Trent, and Trent would just boot it up the pitch, give the ball to Salah, like, maybe he can do something, there's not, like, a very good attacking plan at work here. Mane, of course, had a really bad game again. And you might ask, like, okay, like, and this is something, a lot of people noticed as well. Why was Salah used way out on the flank? And yes, definitely it's true that, your best goal scorer, like, you want him playing closer to goal. You don't want him, wasted out wide there. And he tried his best and everything. But I think the reason that Klopp went with this is, because, Trent's defensive positioning. See, Trent is not terrible 1v1. But his defensive positioning has been so poor this season. He gets caught out all the time. So I think Klopp basically instructed him to stay back a little bit more, and opt to, give more long balls, to the top rather than play more advanced, to put crosses in, but then get caught out on the other end. And because, Trent was staying back more, Klopp needed, somebody to provide that extra width on the right flank, and that's probably why, he kept Salah, right on the touchline over there to, help stretch Chelsea a little bit. But still, it's still not a great tactical decision, dude, because you want your best player, playing closer to goal. You want him to be able to score and actually make a more direct impact on the game. If he was so concerned about that, what I would have done is play maybe a flat 4-4-2 and played Salah in some kind of a strike partnership up top and play, maybe a wide midfielder, the likes of an Ox, maybe starting Jota, wide right, maybe starting Mane wide right, perhaps that's a new could be a new role for him, since he's very poor in the final third this season, something like that. Robertson was given like a much more freedom to like roll him up and down because like, he's just a much more intelligent defensive player. But that was really it for Liverpool. There wasn't really much else going for them. And I feel like, if this was Pep, yes, probably you would have had the defensive issues like without Van Dijk and Matip there. Maybe some like instances of getting caught out trying to build from the back and stuff like that. But like I've never seen him go wrong when it comes to attack and his use of midfielders. And I think like this season's really made me appreciate like Pep a lot more, and we'll talk a little bit more about this like later on as well. I would think like he would get Trent and Robertson much more involved in the actual build-up play. Tuck them in a little bit. He would also like get like the best out of Thiago in building from the back. He would also like bring in Keita more and play more to Keita's strengths rather than like wasting him as a workhorse, because like he's too talented for that. Like there's no other way for me to put it. Like if you have a player like who's that good on the ball and can dribble and create space for others, you have to like use them in a creative way. You can't really waste them as more of like an anti-10 type of player like Wijnaldum, like recovering balls and working hard. So a lot of this was on Klopp. A lot of this was on Klopp at the end of the day. But talking about Chelsea, dude, I think this was a really, really great tactical template by Tuchel. I think Tuchel has created the perfect anti-Liverpool template. He used a lot of what he initially developed in that 2-1 Champions League game between PSG and Liverpool. Of course, like his preferred formation at this point in time, I definitely think is the 3-4-3. He matched up his center backs with Liverpool's front three. Rudiger oftentimes would go out wide to be right on top of Salah and prevent him from getting the ball, cut him off. And that 3-4-3, when Tuchel paired his three center backs up with Liverpool's front three to mark, it created many, many numerical advantages like in other areas of the pitch. It created a 4v3 numerical advantage in midfield, and that really, really helped Chelsea's build-up play and ball progression through those areas. And I think like their combination play, Ziyech of course improved. I mean, he was kind of poor, and kind of invisible in the first half, but even he improved in the second. And then I think the work that Tuchel is doing with Mason Mount, Mount was okay, under Lampard as well. But I think every Chelsea coach, many people ask why are you using this guy? When you have all these big money signings, but I mean Mount is really proving himself to be an invaluable player and a good long-term investment for this team. And I think, regardless of how good they are, any Chelsea manager that comes in is seeing his quality and what he can contribute to the team, and it definitely paid dividends in this game. So great overall performance by Chelsea and great midfield performance as well. If you were to pick out a low point from a Chelsea perspective, it's probably Werner, and he was unlucky for the offside. You have, if you're going to be a world-class striker or a world-class striker, you have to keep working at it, and he got a few more chances, and unfortunately, this guy just is having a really, really bad season. Another few big misses from him in this game. I'm not really sure what his long-term future is, especially since I'm also hearing Haaland rumors. We'll talk about him later as well. And probably the lowest of low points, from the Liverpool perspective, is that in the 60th minute, Klopp took off Salah. And I think that just completely highlights how he's kind of lost the plot at this moment. There's very little from him, when it comes to ideas on how to improve the team, how to get the team going again. And that just kind of shows the state that he's in and that Liverpool are in at this moment. So this definitely doesn't look good on Klopp. It's kind of going the way his last season at Dortmund did in 14-15, where he, after the plan A and plan B failed, like, there was very little else from him, like, I think definitely in that season, like, there were a lot of injuries, yes, but it was really that high intensity style that completely sapped the energy of many of the players, and like that really hurt any good work that they could have done, like in their midfield and defense, and that cost them a lot of points in the Bundesliga. They were like close to relegation at some point as well. And it's kind of a similar situation here. I think with the conservative approach, like Klopp is, like the past couple of years has like helped to maintain those energy levels. But when you keep playing the same 11 again and again and again, and this isn't entirely his fault, it's also on the board and the owners, like you have to replenish the team. Like you have to add squad depth. You have to like, kick some players out, kick some of these aging midfielders like Ronaldo, like maybe perhaps they should have been sold and replaced, by like younger, perhaps more technical players who can offer something different to this team, because they do look tired, and like something definitely has to change this summer in terms of the personnel. And they definitely, if they want to be back at the top, they have to like spend money and increase the size of their squad. And just like a last couple of thoughts on this whole like midfield and fullbacks thing. Like one of the more shocking things I noticed, from Liverpool's perspective, and this really highlights the whole fatigue, is that, they pressed sort of intensively, like, especially in the opening minutes, but with Chelsea, and the formation that Tuchel played and his strategies, like, after Chelsea beat that initial press, it was really, really easy for them to move the ball through Liverpool's midfield. Like, they were very easily able to, like, make combinations and progress the ball, right after that, right after they beat the first press, like, playing through Liverpool's midfield was not at all difficult. There was very little pressure there, and I think that's ultimately down to the fatigue of many of these players. And as far as the whole thing of like Klopp's tactics, I get what he ultimately is trying to do. Like, he's looked and tried to implement certain strategies from Bayern Munich and Real Madrid, and because the thing is, like, yeah, we use our fullbacks as well to like go up the pitch, stretch the opposition, like and help create space and things like that. But when it comes to Real and Bayern, like, it's not the fullbacks that deliver the ultimate cutting edge in the attack. It's the midfielders. Like for Bayern in the past couple of seasons, their top assisters have been Kimmich and Muller. For Real Madrid in that 3P run, like, especially in the season that, we won the La Liga, like the top assister in that campaign was Toni Kroos, followed by Lucas Vazquez. So ultimately, like, which is like the biggest reason why those teams like, score more goals than Liverpool, is because they have that little bit of extra creativity in the middle, like, cutting open teams from the middle. Ultimately, like, it's more difficult than like hitting crosses from wide, absolutely, but it saves a lot of time, like, and it's kind of bizarre. It is kind of odd to see like Klopp play this way, because, and this is a really great segue onto our next topic. When he was at Dortmund, Dortmund hardly, crossing was in their repertoire as well, but they never like ever spammed crosses to this extent. They were a team heavily reliant on flat balls and through balls. Like, they can cut open a team like with two passes. And that's the thing, like, when you go through the middle, this is ultimately a far deadlier and faster method to scoring against your opponent, and it's far more efficient than simply, like, hitting balls, like, in from wide positions. And, like, I feel like one of the main reasons, like, teams do this now is because, football's becoming extremely, robotic and statistical and analytical, where like you look at XG, the favorite word on everybody's tongue these days, like the highest form of XG is when you cross the ball, but this isn't always like the most fluid, the most attractive, or the most and it's kind of odd as it is to say the deadliest or most efficient way to penetrate like opposition either. So that's basically like it on Liverpool, and that's like a very very good segue onto our next subject because like speaking of Dortmund, we're gonna go into Der Klassiker as they say, or more specifically Bayern versus Dortmund. A very very good game, great game, and this was very interesting because Dortmund actually found some form going into this. We of course knew Bayern, coming off that 4-1 against Lazio, Club World Cup winners, sextuple winners now. But Dortmund had a couple of things going for them as well, and I felt like especially with Haaland in there, this wasn't going to be a simple 4-0, the way the fixture went last season. Where Bayern just pretty much just sleepwalked it. I knew, of course, Bayern could score all those goals, but Dortmund, had a few things up their sleeve as well. As long as Haaland is there, they always have a chance. And, there were twists and turns, but ultimately, from what I saw in this game, the better team won. Dortmund breached Bayern. They breached their midfield and their defense. They scored 2 very well-taken goals, and, of course, Haaland was there. It was a real battle of the strikers because then Lewandowski responded very well with a hat-trick. But the better team won, the penalty shouts and everything. Okay, I get it. Was it a pen? Maybe. But, the thing about this game is, dude, as well as Dortmund played going forward, and there were a lot of, things that we're going to get into tactically that they did right in that department. But, whenever Bayern would turn over possession and, go forward and attack, they looked, especially in the first half. The second half, for the most part, despite that time Bayern actually taking the lead late on in the game, was more even. The first half was actually, even more dominant from Bayern, I felt like, because, every time Bayern would go forward, after conceding those 2 goals in the opening 10 minutes, they looked like they were about to score. And it was a combination of Bayern being good, particularly Sané being very good, and also as good as, Sané and Bayern were, Dortmund's defense was just as bad because, every time Bayern went forward, they looked like they were, gonna score. Any random cross, low cross, a high ball over the top, into Dortmund's box, the defense was struggling to clear. It took them 10, 15, 20 seconds just to clear their lines in some of these, in some of these attacking moves and some of these sequences. The defending was abysmal, and you can tell, what's more shocking is that this is an ongoing issue for Dortmund. Their defense has always been kind of known for being shaky, and I don't know, maybe is this just something they don't rehearse in training? But, it's just awful, dude. So, Bayern, the attacking was very even. I'll actually say Dortmund, might be even better in some ways in attacking, and I'll explain why. But, in terms of the midfield play and in terms of the back lines, Bayern is just superior, and they definitely showed that. They were dominant. They had, far more shots by the end of it because of, how poor Dortmund were defensively and the kind of issues that Bayern were causing them, the kind of weapons they could bring off the bench. Gnabry coming off the bench. More possession, more passes completed, shots. It was a fairly dominant win, and 4-2 really does reflect the scoreline given the chances and how active each team was in the opposition's area. So really fair result, fair play to Bayern. This was a good win, a very impressive comeback considering that they were 2-0 down at some point. And now going deeper into the tactics, so what did Dortmund do well in this? We know defensively, that's where they lost the game. But at this point in time, be it in the Bundesliga, the Premier League, even to an extent Serie A, we kind of know in these leagues, who's gonna win. Of course Juve might of course catch Inter, but I feel like these leagues are kind of set what happens in these games, and like especially in this Der Klassiker, we all like deep down knew Bayern was gonna win. They're stronger in most of the positions, man for man on the pitch. But I feel like Dortmund, for the very first time in a big game, because we know Bayern, like in the odd game here and there against Hoffenheim, Hertha Berlin as well, like even though they came out of that with a victory, like Hertha Berlin still caused them issues. Like in these odd games here and there, you saw some of the issues with Bayern. They do tend to raise their game a lot, like in these big matches. So for the very first time, I think under Flick's, managerial tenure, you saw Bayern defensively kind of properly getting exposed for the first time in a big game. And as shocking as that is to say, like, because they play such high-risk football. It's very attractive, it's very deadly going forward, but there's a risk attached to it. But this is the first time really, that I've seen a team properly exploit that offensively. Of course, the other end couldn't hold up. So what did Dortmund do well? And many people are going to say, like, immediately the first reaction is going to be like, oh, the high line, right? The high line. They finally figured out the high line. Like, this is the first time, the high line's getting exposed. That was the audience reaction initially, like, within the first 10 minutes. But it's actually more complicated than that. And it all goes back to, like, what I was saying in the post-match for the Hertha Berlin game. When it comes to Bayern, like when you look at this like 4-2-3-1 formation that Flick's got going, like I consider, the midfield of course is really the key to all of this. But here's an even like more zoomed in view of things. I don't consider, first of all, Thomas Muller to be a midfielder. Yes, his work rate is very impressive. He does track back. He does help defensively. But how often have you seen Muller consistently dropping deep during build-up plays? How often have you seen Muller go all the way back to the halfway line and play long balls into Lewandowski when Lewandowski's in the box, or when Gnabry's like on the byline? Like sometimes the likes of, other cams like Messi or Neymar, when he's playing that position for PSG, will do these things. They will drop very deep to get involved in build-up plays. Muller isn't really a midfielder. He's a shadow striker. His game is like in the final third or just outside the box, is where he's most effective. Although like, yes, like I mentioned, the defensive contribution is there, but I consider him an attacker. Bayern's midfield is these two men, Kimmich and Goretzka, right? And why am I talking about all this now? And it does tie back into what I've been saying since basically the turn of the year regarding Bayern. When you beat that initial first wave of pressure from Bayern's front four, Lewandowski, the two wingers, and lastly Muller, all that remains between the opposition attackers and Bayern's fairly flat back four is two men, the double pivot, and then the rest is just acres of space. That's, I think, what people are getting confused here. See, everybody thinks that it's that ball over the top or that through ball, over or through Bayern's last line that ultimately kills them. It's that very long, direct pass, right? That's not necessarily true. And I think this game highlighted it. Yes, building out of the back, more methodically and slowly is a really bad idea against Bayern. And they almost caught Dortmund out, whenever Dortmund tried to do that. That initial long ball from Dortmund was not a direct contributor to them getting those chances. That initial long ball was to relieve the pressure, and it led up to the attacking move. it wasn't the final, it's not the final like piece of the attacking puzzle. It's very different from the way Lyon did it. Against Lyon, like Lyon was very good in how they, like in the first like 10-15 minutes when they got like 2 or 3 gilt-edge opportunities to score in that tie. Like against Bayern, Lyon like would hit like a diagonal or a through ball or a ball over the top, and the likes of Depay or Akambi would get on the end of it, and they would be like basically 1-on-1 against Neuer in certain occasions in that game. This wasn't really that, and in this season, I'm actually like seeing as it goes on, I'm actually seeing like that's actually not exactly the way teams are beating Bayern. Or beating Bayern's like high line and high press. Like the long ball exists, and the long ball's definitely helped. The best way to get past that first wave of pressure from Bayern's attackers, their front four, is via going long. But it's that long ball into the midfield, which then leads to some kind of, combination play in that space between Bayern's attack and their back line, which then creates the opportunities for for the other teams to score on them. And what do I mean by this? Take a look at this. Right. This is Dortmund's second goal. Look how much space Schultz has between the lines here. It's acres of space. This isn't like just a matter of like a simple ball over the top and beating Bayern that way. No, like that's the way, many people will have you believe is the way to beat Bayern. That direct, long ball over the top, right? That's actually not, the proper way to exploit this defense. Like the proper way to exploit it, and I'll tell you why. See, the thing is, Bayern's back four is extremely pacey. We've seen it throughout the Champions League under, Flick's tenure, where like teams attempt to go over the top, but because of the recovery speed and the recovery runs of Alaba, Boateng, and Davies, those guys will ultimately like intercept most of those passes. And then on top of that, you also have the sweeper keeper Neuer, who will get on the end of those balls and clear it before the attackers will like get onto that pass. So this idea of like just one long route one direct ball over the top being the way to beat Bayern, that's not actually true. The way to beat Bayern is that this 4-2-3-1 system, like with the flat back four and the aggressive front four, will leave a lot of space in that midfield. That's the soft spot you have to hit. Notice how here, like, the Bayern's back four specifically have the ball in front of them. That's the sweet spot that you have to hit when it comes to Bayern, because that's where the dangerous space is from a Bayern perspective. It's the large amount of gaps between the front line and the back four. That's the sweet spot where like the opposition, cams and creative players can have a lot of freedom and, to create these opportunities. Because the thing is, like, Bayern love to play a wide game. They keep their back four flat, and sometimes Davies will go forward on the flank. And then like they like to keep their wingers wide as well, and sometimes their wingers will also cut inside like like closer to the final third. But like that flank game has a consequence, and this is the beauty of the Champions League. Every formation on such a wide pitch, like a large pitch, you only have 11 men to work with. So every formation is going to have weaknesses. Every formation, every attacking setup is going to leave some kind of space. And that's the fascinating thing. So in the case of Bayern, like that space in the middle is really like the place I believe teams, can and probably will, depending on the quality, like try to exploit over there. And the way to do that is this. Like it's not just raw pace. You can't beat Bayern's back four with raw pace. The way to do it is combinations. Take a look at this. Look at the combination play over here for Dortmund's second goal. The run being made by Thorgan Hazard, and then the square ball. That's how you have to do it, And people confuse moving the ball quickly with being direct. Yes, the fastest way to move the ball up the pitch is just hitting a long ball, But when I say you have to move the ball quickly, it doesn't necessarily mean just hit a long direct pass every time. Moving the ball quickly can involve, very intricate combination plays at times, very intricate short passes, intricate medium passes, things like that. Sometimes, playing electrifying combination play, at very quick speeds, it requires highly, highly technical players to do it. But this is doable sometimes at the highest level. And this is why ultimately it's really, really difficult to beat Bayern, because I believe that's the way to go to beat them. You can't just beat them for raw pace, because ultimately the ball can move faster than any individual player. You have to beat them with intricate combination play during the transitions, during the counterattacks, and in that midfield area. That's ultimately the way to beat Bayern. You have to set up compact. You have to be good defensively, which Dortmund weren't. And then during the transition, you have to then funnel your attack through the middle. Use intricate and very fast combination play. And then using the sort of trickery, movement, positioning, you can beat Bayern's backline. Positioning over speed, ball movement over simply, a burst of pace or a foot chase. That's the way to go. Real Madrid probably did this, to the best effect in 2017. And there's only a handful of teams I can see do it. Man City is one, and I think PSG is another. Other than that, I don't really see any team being able to beat Bayern. They're still, I'd say, overall the favorites to win the Champions League. So now we move on to the third big game of this week. And this was, of course, Man City against Man United, the Manchester Derby. Now, Man City going into this game were on a crazy 22-21 game winning streak. It was close to the winning streak that Bayern had in the past year. It was close to the winning streak, similar kind of winning streak that Carlo Ancelotti's Madrid team were on just after winning the Champions League in 2014. But here's the thing, right? This was probably the biggest test for Manchester City this whole season in all competitions, in terms of the kind of opposition they faced. Their first big test was against Liverpool at Anfield. Given the history there, given their difficulty in that stadium, of course it was a big test, and they passed it with flying colors. Great performance. Over here, this is probably, they had the home field advantage and everything, but this is probably the hardest team they've had to deal with so far this season. Man United are, if you look at the table, according to the standings, they're the second best team in England, second most consistent team in England. They're definitely better than Liverpool on form. And, there's also that added bit of intricacy there with Pep and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Solskjaer historically has given him problems. I think Man United overall, they haven't won that many games against top four opposition. This is their first win, I think, against the big hitters in England. But actually the record isn't that bad. Many of those games are draws, and actually they've not conceded that many goals. Their defense is actually pretty good. In these big games. So, of course, barring the 6-1 thrashing at the very beginning of the season. So, with regards to this game, I think, Man United are, Man City won't be facing, this kind of team, for a while. If they do run into Bayern, like, this is not going to be really the same thing they're going to be dealing with against Bayern. And I say that in a good way for Man City. In this game, the thing that, like, really, like, impressed me a lot about Man United is that, like, okay, first of all, they were far more aggressive than in previous encounters between the two Manchester clubs. Especially, like, under the Ole regime, right? Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, I think, like, incorporated a much more, like, aggressive press at certain periods and certain intervals in this game, particularly, like, the opening few minutes. And specifically, I think I really, really, like, I have to give credit to Ole here. I still don't think he's the best manager, but, like, he got the balance spot on in this game. And the players, like, this was a complete team performance. Okay, you can point out maybe Luke Shaw, but other than that, there's not many, like, outstanding, like, man of the match candidates in this. It was the levels are all pretty close. The contribution is pretty even, from the 11. And they pressed at the right time and they dropped off at the right time. And I really, really, you have to congratulate them and appreciate the amount of work and the work rate of this Man United team, the whole team throughout this game, because they pressed really aggressively. In the moments where City were building up, that's the perfect time to press them. As Liverpool showed, a couple seasons ago, of course, City's defense is a lot better. And for the most part, they were resistant to it. But it did still give them issues and slow their build-up play down. And then, when City, broke through that pressure and, went into United's half, United's, attackers and their midfield would drop off, very quickly and fall into line and stay compact and defend really well. City were limited to a very few number of chances, here and there in this game. Of course, Sterling, didn't have the best game. Yes, De Bruyne probably had one of his worst and most ineffective games in City. Maybe, it'd have to be, maybe his top 10 worst performances, maybe. Some of the City players didn't have a good game individually, but for the most part, I really, really give credit to Man United, because City were on amazing form going into this game, so they were playing very, very well. So you have to give credit to Man United for putting up a very good fight, and they deserve this win because yes, City did have most of the possession. Yes, United became slightly more reactive after going a goal up very early from the penalty. Yes, but overall United were the more deserving team on a tactical basis. They limited the chances City got. They created a lot of chances for themselves on the counter. A very well taken goal by Luke Shaw for the second one. So what went wrong for City in this game? I mean, conceding early didn't help. But I feel like the biggest issue here is probably this, right? And here's the thing. The league is done. The league is done because the thing is, Man City are very consistent. They're very resilient, and they have very, very high concentration levels when it comes to league play. So they're probably gonna keep on racking up points. Probably finish with 90 plus points by the end of the season and win the league. United are that type of team that'll show up in these big games, but then they'll draw to a Fulham or a West Ham. Next week, so there you can't fully count on United to stay as consistent or nearly as consistent as City, and I feel like that points gap might even grow from 11 to possibly maybe 15 to 18 points by the end of the season. So the league is still a wrap for Man City. I still think Pep is gonna look at this game, and the one advantage to this loss is this, right? There's a very, very key turning point in the season coming up very soon, and that's the March to April international break. After that international break, and this is where it gets important because the league is done. So for Man City, it's the cup competitions. I don't care, what happens in the FA Cup and the EFL Cup. If Man City lose that, it doesn't change anything. They've already achieved the domestic treble in seasons past. It's all about the Champions League. So this loss for Pep came at an opportune time, or a good time. If there's ever a good time to lose, it's now. And I'll tell you why. Okay, so Man City are having a break coming up. After that international break, the games are very rapid fire for Champions League. You almost immediately, within the span of a week or two, you get hit with your first leg of the quarters. Then immediately the week after that, the second leg of the quarters. Then the week after that, the first leg of the semis. Then the second leg of the semis the week after that. And then like a little bit of gap, and then you have the final. So there's very little time to adjust and make changes if you lose momentum after the international break. If you lose before the international break, it still gives you ample time to look at the games, look at the tactical issues, and fix up, before like the key stretch of the season. Because after that international break ends, there's really no looking back. It's, your best 11. You have to play to the best of your ability, field the best possible team you can. Stick with your plan A or plan B that, as long as you rehearse that plan B. And just play your style, for the remainder of the knockout games. There's very little room for adjustment, and that's a different conversation for Pep, because I feel like especially last season, one of the big reasons why City didn't do as well in the latter stages of the Champions League is because he changed up at the last minute against Lyon. You can't change in these crucial stretches of the season. If you have to change something, you have to change it now. So whatever, so this is a good learning experience for City, and a good learning experience for Pep for him to change up. I still wouldn't change that much. It's kind of unlucky that City got a very early penalty. Although that penalty was by the letter of the law pen, but it did change the game to an extent. It changed the game, because the thing is United were able to drop off more. City had to push up more, and that's as one would expect, United could then hit them on the transitions. I think the worst part about that from the City perspective is how easily though United bypassed City's midfield or ran through their midfield during some of those transitions, in particular Shaw, right? And this is a reoccurring problem with City. We talked about Bayern. Bayern's flat back four, their high press and everything, and how sometimes you can find spaces in the middle. With City, it's a little bit different. Their weakness is a little bit different, and this is also a weakness that has shown up in the past. We saw it last season in Stamford Bridge when Chelsea beat them. We definitely saw it against Lyon. We've seen it a little bit against Gladbach, but Gladbach didn't have the players to exploit it. And that's the whole thing with inverted fullbacks. Now, where did the inverted fullbacks thing start? And why did it start? And I believe the way that all planned out, there's several reasons for it. It started in Pep's Bayern tenure. Now look at this slide here. This is kind of what Bayern's formation was in Pep's first season there. Pep likes to have his wingers stay very wide, to help stretch the opposition back line. At that time it was Ribery and Robben. Several factors contributed to the subsequent, it's not an invention, but within this team, it was kind of an invention of Pep that he's taken with him to City, the inverted fullback, right? And oftentimes this would be Lahm. Lahm, Pep has often said he's the most intelligent player he's worked with. Lahm oftentimes was deployed as a proper out-and-out DM because he was so good at moving into the interior. But I believe that that wasn't the main reason that Pep first started using inverted fullbacks. He didn't use it that much in Barcelona. Alves would be involved in the build-up plays, but he would stick, out on the flank. He would do combinations with Messi on the flank. Abidal, like, I mean, the less said about that, the better. But, like, with Bayern and the inverted fullback, I believe it was a response by Pep to what I mentioned earlier with the current Bayern team. Like, it's to add more numbers and augment that midfield in those central spaces to help stop counterattacks, right? There's a lot of space that if you keep your back four flat and play this kind of offensive attacking 4-2-3-1 formation, right? Like, there's a lot of space, like I said, that opens up in the middle. So what Pep did is, like, and this had a twofold effect, he pushed his fullbacks slightly up and tucked them inside. The twofold effect is this. Number one, okay, numerical advantages over there. Like, it helps to deal with that. Number two, the numerical advantages then, like, lead to, like a more effective counter press. When the opposition is trying to transition on you through that central space. Number three, right? It helps also in build-up plays when you're trying to, like, build through the midfield and progress the ball that way. There would be a lot of opportunities to create triangles in those little, like, interchanges here, before the ball gets hit out wide to a winger. So that's, like, I believe, where this whole idea of the inverted fullback comes in now, the weaknesses of this system. If Man City lose the ball, or Bayern in those days used to lose the ball, and this is like what I said before as well, like, every system, when you're playing on a huge pitch, like, on these big, like, stages like the Champions League, you only have 11 players, so there's going to be gaps somewhere. If you tuck your fullbacks in, that, like, of course, would leave space on the flanks. Now, like, you saw it even against Liverpool, in 17-18. Teams with very electric wingers oftentimes, like, can exploit Guardiola's teams because, like, it's that sort of direct ball to the flanks, right? And that you can then, like, exploit that space. And it becomes worse. See, like, sometimes it's okay to be narrow when you're like back more, defending more. It's okay to defend narrow. But the thing is that when you hold, like, a higher line, like City were forced to today, to try and, like, equalize against Man United, those spaces on the flanks that get left open because of the inverted fullback, like, policy, become very, very troublesome. Extremely troublesome. Because, like, wingers will love to attack those spaces. And that's probably the easiest way to transition against Man City. Now, does this mean that Man City, has no chance of winning Champions League? This, that. It doesn't change anything. It really doesn't change anything. And in fact, given everything that we talked about, if they face Bayern Munich tomorrow, right? Like, I'm sure Pep will look at these things, like, there are some ways to make amends for some of these tactical problems with City, for example. Like, I feel like, obviously in these big Champions League games, they kind of have to raise their level and their press. So when they're being transitioned on the flanks, like, they need to sort of, shift more numbers out there and try to, like, maybe commit tactical fouls or whatever to, like, stop the ball progression. But here's the thing with that, right? I still say on a tactical level, the Bayern Munich versus Man City, like, City are still, like, top two in Champions League. Because there's very few teams, like, that can beat them. And I feel Man United's template was, like, literally, like, the perfect, like, template to beat them. As in, it's perfect to the extent that, like, there's, like, I don't think there's any other team. There's only one team that can execute this kind of, like, a template that United used in the Champions League effectively against City, like, and turn it into a winning formula. And it's not Bayern. Like, City versus Bayern is pretty 50-50 when it comes to tactical. And I'll even go so far as to say it's 51-49, or maybe, like, even, like, 55-45 in favor of Man City on a tactical level, right? Because the thing is, like, Bayern will cause City like issues that City hasn't had to deal with that much in the Prem. City will cause Bayern issues that Bayern have never had to deal with like for years. Because for the first time in a long time, maybe for the first time since they played Real Madrid, Bayern would be dealing with a midfield that's superior to theirs. And the fact that City are better in the middle compared to Bayern, like what we talked about before, they can do a lot of those combinations and intricate fast plays. They have the potential to do that in those gaps between the lines, against Bayern. And at the same time, look at the electrifying, wingers that Bayern have, and put them out on the flanks. Gnabry on the flank, Sane, Coman, they will exploit the defense of Man City, And for City, here's the thing, against a team like Bayern will cause them issues that, we've not seen. They will cause this defense issues that we've not seen. And, the biggest question mark for me regarding Man City is how good will this defense, or I should say how well will this defense hold up when they're pinned in for, periods of, 8 to 10 minutes, maybe 10 to 15 minutes. How well will this defense handle sustained pressure like that? It's long forgotten, but there was a moment in the West Brom game where, in the opening 10 minutes, before Man City just completely took over and blew West Brom away, 5-0, where West Brom had won a set piece, I believe, and then for 2 to 5 minutes kept City in their own box by, hitting cross after cross in there, and City actually struggled to clear their lines. That kind of sustained pressure, and I know City's defense has gotten a lot better since this instance, but against Liverpool in 18-19, of course, the addition of Diaz and his chemistry with Stones has, will I think they'll handle this better. But in the second half of their title deciding game against Liverpool stepped up a lot more and attacked a lot more, and there were periods there. Of course, City would break through them eventually and then go on to cause Liverpool problems in transition, which I'll get to later. But there were moments in there where Liverpool, after bringing on Fabinho especially and getting more control in the midfield, had City really pinned in their box, putting in crosses, and things like that. That's how Liverpool, in fact, got the equalizer in that game to make it 1-1. But, I feel like that's something the City defense is not used to, because there's not any team in the Premier League right now that can do that against them. Liverpool potentially could have, but we all know the form they're in. They've not had to really deal with that, because they have a midfield, and players on the ball and a very good, press to eventually break through that pressure. So teams can't sustain that kind of intensity and pin City in like that for prolonged periods. Bayern potentially can and City will break through eventually, but can they last 10 minutes of sustained pressure like that in the box where they're pinned in and there's crosses coming in, and you have the likes of Lewandowski and Muller in there? It's not going to be like Mane and Salah where DS has such a height advantage over these guys. Lewandowski is probably, after Ronaldo, the best player in the air given his heading technique. So they will ask questions of City, with their possession-based style and their flank game that you and I have not seen. On the flip side, and this is where I think the game will be won and why City have maybe a slight tactical advantage in this. I think this potential matchup will be, one based on who is more effective in transitions. Both these teams love to attack. Both these teams at some point in those 180 minutes is going to be caught out by the other. So who's going to win the transition game? Will Bayern win the transition game by exploiting the space left on City's flanks when their fullbacks come inside? Or will City better exploit the space in the middle against Bayern, that Bayern leave with just their double pivot in there. And ultimately, the winner of this is determined by who has the better defense. And the simple fact is, no defensive partnership right now in Europe is better than Stones and Diaz. So tactically, I just trust City's defense, to withstand those transitions slightly more than I trust Bayern's, And, the advantages, for Bayern in this matchup are actually not that tactical. They have, intangible advantages. For example, City, and you saw it in today's game against Man United as well, when the going was tough and Pep wasn't really, he didn't really have any ideas. City were lacking that kind of X factor forward who can just create something out of nothing or hit a crazy shot and score out of nowhere. They're missing a Haaland type of player, a prime Aguero. Occasionally for them in the league and in big games in the past, Sane could do this. For example, against Liverpool in that game that I was talking about earlier. They're kind of missing that X factor in this team, which is why I think Pep, deep down he wants Messi in the team, because Messi will, in theory give them that X factor to win these games, that bit of individual brilliance, which is so important in these Champions League games. And the thing is that, with a front three of Jesus, Sterling, and Mahrez, there isn't really that guy who can just, in a semi or a quarter of a Champions League just flip the game and on its head individually. And when City are very dependent on Pep's tactics and his system. The thing with Bayern is they have those individuals. When the tactics of Flick get exposed, especially Lewandowski, who scored I think a third to a half of Bayern's, somewhere between a third and a half of Bayern's goals in Bundesliga. He's probably the best player in the world right now. Dropped a hat-trick against Dortmund. He's a guy, who has the technical ability and the eye for goal to just flip a game, or just decide a game, based on his individual skill. So, and also the added intangible of Bayern, having been there and done that, having been tested more. They beat PSG, they beat the Barcelonas, they've crossed that hurdle of a quarterfinals, semifinals, and they've proven it. City, this is, they've only been tested really twice, like I said, this season, in my opinion, in all comps. They've not been tested properly in the Champions League, So, and, elsewhere, they were sublime against Liverpool. Today, not so much. So they're kind of, in that sense, still an unknown quantity. This would probably be the most interesting game, over two legs in the Champions League. And people will say, they would rather this be a final. I would rather this be two legs. If it's a final, I'm going with Bayern, because then those intangible factors, that superstar in Lewandowski, that experience would really count for a lot. But over two legs, it's more tactical. And of course the intangibles come into effect, but so do the tactics. So it's very, 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 very 50-50. That tie is very, very, very 50-50. Tactically, because of the defense, it favors City. But in terms of the X factors, Bayern has an argument there. So it can really, really go either way. But from this game, and here's the thing, right? League form, I wanted to make a point about league form versus Champions League form. League form has nothing to do with Champions League form, right? Okay, it's complicated, and it depends on the team we're talking about too. Certain teams have that Champions League DNA where even though they're not great in the league, they can still go places and win the Champions League. Real Madrid are one of those teams, right? So in that sense, yes, league form doesn't really, and it goes both ways. For example, Sevilla against Dortmund. Sevilla were the informed team, but we know Sevilla more often than not has disappointed us in this competition. They don't really have that extra gear, to go places in Champions League. And again, they lost against Dortmund. So certain teams have that that sort of magic when it comes to the Champions League, where they can switch on or sometimes switch off in this competition, which is why league form doesn't matter. Now, tactical issues carry over into every competition. In 14-15, Madrid were defending champions. Madrid in the 3 seasons after that would, create history in the Champions League. But in that season, there was such a big hole in Madrid's midfield because we didn't have a DM. We didn't have Casemiro in that season, and Modric was also injured, so we were missing work rate in our midfield. And even though we had all the X factors in the attack and the defense and everything, that tactical issue caused us problems in every competition, from the Copa del Rey to the La Liga to, in big games in El Clásicos, in Madrid derbies. And it caused us the issues in the Champions League. Like against Juventus, they were able to transition against us well and exploit those spaces in the midfield. Like Barcelona in 16-17. They had a severe tactical issue. They were going into that season without an established right back. They had to use Sergio Roberto as a right back, and again, the less said about that, the better. Because we all know how that turns out. Their midfield was aging. These are things, where you can't just hit a switch and turn it on and off. These tactical issues will carry over and spill over into any game you play, regardless of whether it's league, whether it's cup, whether it's Champions League. These holes are going to be a problem for your team anywhere. And so the thing is, here's why I talk about that, right? There's just one team in the Champions League that can exploit exactly the tactical frailties that Man City displayed today. Man City will I think they really want the Champions League this season, and they will raise their level for the Champions League, right? But and of course Pep will make some tweaks, and things like that, give his players more instructions on how to cover those key spaces. But if you're looking at from a tactical standpoint, right, this template can be exactly to the letter, and potentially even better and sexier than the way Man United did it, replicated by Pochettino and PSG. Based on this game and the tactical weaknesses that Man United showed us, from City, I think, PSG are looking at Bayern and City a lot, in addition to some other teams right now. And of course, they're not 100% guaranteed to go through either to the quarterfinals, let's be real. They have a tricky game coming up against Barcelona, which they have to play really well still and see through. But they're that kind of team that can press at the right moments, very specific intervals, the way Man United did. They can drop off and sit back, as we saw against Barcelona, because they have a very, very good center back partnership and defend very well in that compact 4-4-2 shape. They can transition extremely well. They have the wide men, Mbappe, Neymar, Di Maria, Sarabia, sometimes Draxler as well can play there, to exploit the flanks. And I'm telling you right now, in transition, PSG, I have to say something about PSG here, because the thing is, this team is so good, so tactically flexible. They have such versatile players that can play any style of football, counter-attacking, more defensive, more conservative, or ultra-attacking. If it wasn't for individual mistakes and complications, for example, the front three misfiring, Verratti being injured in the final, they probably would have won a couple of Champions Leagues already. This PSG, they're probably like the most dangerous. They're probably the best team in the Champions League on their day. On their day, they have the defense and the attack to beat Bayern. They also have the defense and the attack to beat City. The question is, like, still can't fully trust them because of their history of individual errors. But just on a tactical level, in terms of personnel, I mean, like, they have a very good shout out to be the best team in this, because like I said, when you're in these kind of competitions, like, it's a lot of it is dependent on individual ability, right? So if those key individuals are there for PSG, they can beat anybody. But specifically for Man City, Bayern is not the team to avoid. I think Paris is probably the team they want to avoid most, because Pochettino will watch this. He will look at the defensive structure of Man United. He'll look at, like, when they pressed City. He'll look at the way they slowed down City's build-up play out of the back. And he'll look at, like, the way... And he already has a template from his Tottenham days. So combining the United template with his own template from 2019, and, playing those tactics to the strengths of the likes of Mbappe, who's extremely pacey, and Neymar, who's extremely pacey, and PSG's midfielders... It could be, it might be kind of a disaster in Man City's, like, path to the Champions League, because I don't think, and this is probably PSG's best strength, and I was talking about this, I was alluding to this a little bit before, when it comes to transition play specifically, I don't think there's any team through combination plays or whatever that can move the ball as fast during transitions right now as PSG. That's their deadliest weapon. The way these guys can combine and move the ball when they're counterattacking, I mean, it's sublime. It's beautiful to watch. Like, the movement, the pace, the precision of Verratti, Neymar, Mbappe, and some of these guys, even Paredes sometimes. They're a very, very, very dangerous team, and this is kind of a big hurdle for them because it's Barcelona. But if they get past this, it's gonna be they're gonna be quite a handful for anybody who, like, runs into them. And lastly, we come to our La Liga topics today, with regards to Madrid and Atletico Madrid. I think the league race is on now. I think each one of these teams has a chance. Barcelona, I still favor slightly more compared to Madrid, slowly on the fact that they're have fewer injuries, and they have that X factor in Messi, who he's probably the best, like, league player of all time. He's coming into form now, especially if Barca make that exit out of the Champions League. They'll just have the domestic competitions to compete for. So if they make an early exit, there's a pretty high chance that they win a domestic double this season. Another plus, for Barcelona today is Laporta, who of course won the election. So regarding that, the way Barcelona collapsed, and I say this as a Madrid fan, the way Barcelona collapsed in the Champions League, it's definitely due to oftentimes the leadership of the likes of a Jose Maria Bartomeu, and some of those board members making really bad decisions and transfers. So Barca kind of have to go back, and I hope Laporta, really reinforces this, buying the right players, buying the right midfielders and center backs who are good on the ball, and sort of not going back exactly to the way that they used to play, against, like back in 2011, they can't really go back to exactly tiki-taka. But they have to go back to that, Cruyffian style of football, that ultra-attacking 4-3-3 style. Because, if with some tweaks and a more direct, methodology, that style could still be devastating today. You saw it, kind of with Ajax. You see it with City. You even see, a little bit of it with some of maybe even Thomas Tuchel's teams. You see it definitely in Bayern as well. Because they were influenced by Guardiola with the high line, and the sort of combinations they make. Except of course they're more reliant on the flanks than the midfield. But back in the day, nobody used to do it like Barcelona. They influenced so many teams. They influenced Klopp at Dortmund as well, because no team was able to just a buzzsaw cut open opposition right down the middle through, like I said, it's those triangles and combinations that were really, really especially devastating to teams. And the way they did Man United, the way they did many of the teams in Spain at the time, it was just extremely fast, and you were chasing shadows all day. So it's still, with a little bit of added firepower and a more direct formula, it could still work today. So and it really depends on how Laporta handles the financial situation, because it'll take years and years for Barcelona to recover from the damage done by the pandemic and from the previous board. But give it 4 to 5 years. If they manage the situation well, they can indeed make a comeback later on in this decade.